We're going to watch Pennsylvania very quickly. We're going to watch Pennsylvania. Go down to certain areas and watch and study and make sure other people don't come in and vote 5 times. Because if you do that, and I know you're all voting. Is everybody here voting? If you do that, we're not going to lose. The only way we can lose, in my opinion, I really mean this, Pennsylvania, is if cheating goes on. I really believe it. We have to call up law enforcement, and we have to have the sheriffs and the police chiefs and everybody watching. Because if we get cheated out of this election, if we get cheated out of a win in Pennsylvania, which is such a vital state, especially when I know what's happening here, folks. I know she can't beat what's happening here. The only way they can beat it, in my opinion, and I mean this 100%, if in certain sections of the state they cheat, okay?
Donald Trump saying that cheating is the only way Hillary Clinton could possibly win Pennsylvania. Again, the electoral history on Pennsylvania, we've been going through this. This is a state that twice voted for Bill Clinton, 1992, 1996. Twice voted for Barack Obama. It's a state where Al Gore won in 2000, where John Kerry won in 2004. It's a state that last voted for a Republican in a presidential race 28 years ago. But Donald Trump says that the only possible way Hillary Clinton could win that state is through cheating, and saying more specifically that certain sections of the state are prone to cheating.
We're so honored to be working with Donald Trump and the campaign. Don't believe the garbage you read. Let me tell you something. Donald Trump, the Republican Party, all of you, we're going to put him in the White House and save this country together.
The only way we can lose, in my opinion, I really mean this, Pennsylvania, is if cheating goes on. And we have to call up law enforcement, and we have to have the sheriffs and the police chiefs and everybody watching. Because if we get cheated out of this election, if we get cheated out of a win in Pennsylvania, which is such a vital state, especially when I know what's happening here, folks. I know she can't beat what's happening here. The only way they can beat it, in my opinion, and I mean this 100%, if in certain sections of the state they cheat.
Certain sections of the state, April. What do you think he's talking about there?
In urban sections, of course.
Well, you know what he's talking about, Hallie. He's talking about Philadelphia. That's what he's talking. Certain sections of this state, certain sections. I know what he's talking about when he's out in Altoona, Johnstown. That's a message. They cheat in Philly. That's what he's saying. They wouldn't cheat here in Johnstown or in Altoona or even Pittsburgh. No, they cheat back in the East, back in Philly. I know what he's saying.
I mean, people here booed, right? They jeered the mention of that. They mention of Philadelphia, for example. But this idea that Trump is continuing to talk about a rigged system plays on 2 fronts. Number one, to Trump, it's a way of continuing to promote this argument that the big guys are stacking it up against him, that he's the underdog and that he's fighting for the people like the ones in Altoona. On the flip side, his critics argue that this is actually one of the more dangerous long-term arguments that Donald Trump is making, that when we all wake up on November 9th, that if Trump loses, he can then point to the system and say it's not right, it's not fair, it's rigged, that undermines the foundation of what the election system is built on in this country. It is an argument that he started making just a couple of weeks ago, and that he's brought up time and time again at places and rallies like this one.
You know, it'll sell in Ecuador. That's the kind of stuff they do in third world countries with less developed democracies. You always say you'll have it stolen because then you never really lose. Anyway, thank you, Hallie Jackson, for the reporting there.
And I'm afraid the election's going to be rigged. I have to be honest. I'm telling you, November 8th, we better be careful because that election's going to be rigged. And I hope the Republicans are watching closely or it's going to be taken away from us.
In 2012, Trump made the same kinds of accusations on election eve, that the election had been rigged, that Romney had won by a huge margin in popular votes, that we were a loser nation, and he called for a revolution. So this isn't new for him. But in the same way, if you delegitimize the entire political process, you cannot govern in this country. The founders created a system where you try to build at least some broad consensus that the process is legitimate, even if you don't get the outcomes that you want. And if you delegitimize not just the president, as we saw with Barack Obama, but the entire political process, and people believe that the president who's been elected is an illegitimate president, You can bring about, as we saw he did in 2012, a call for a revolution, which is another incitement potentially to violence, but you're going to have no acceptance of any of the policies that emerge and probably no ability to enact policies. It's a terrible thing.
Quite frankly, the Republicans have been singing the same sad song for a long time. As you know, in Ohio, places like North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, those of us in the legislature have really had to endure Republicans really using public policy to take away access to the ballot box for poor people, for people of color. And I remember in Ohio, and the point that you made earlier about as soon as President Barack Obama was elected, let's just be honest, as soon as a black man was elected, all of a sudden my Republican colleagues went cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, and they could not believe that he was legitimately elected. And that was when they really started on this trail of making it harder through public policy for African Americans in particular, other people of color, elders, young people to vote. And what we should be doing in this country is really pushing for elections to expand and protect the access to the ballot box. So this is not new, Chris.
Norm, that point about the sort of, and your point about the delegitimization sort of existing earlier, I mean, you had polling in 2009 where majority of Republican voters thought Acorn stole the election. You have Donald Trump now on the trail saying people are voting 15 times, which is not true. People don't, I mean, it's just a myth. But this is one place where Trump seems to kind of continuity of a certain seeds that have been sown before.
Absolutely, and I think Nina is very much on point here. All of these efforts to restrict voting, and it's not just voter ID laws, it's cutting early voting days, it's cutting the number of polling places and the like, are justified on the basis of voter fraud, which we know at the polls is virtually non-existent. And if you're arguing that there's massive voter fraud, you're suggesting that elections are illegitimate, or at least that a lot of voters are illegitimate. So Trump is playing right into that wheelhouse. And of course, this is also the guy who led the birther movement trying to delegitimize President Obama.